I read the message twice, then a third time. He had sent me divorce papers over text, a screenshot, like it was a lease renewal notice. And then I checked our account. Zero. He had taken everything we built in 11 years and moved it before I even finished reading. I stood there in the kitchen. I was very calm. That's the part people never understand, how calm I was. That was Diana. And the calm she describes, that stillness in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, the phone face up on the marble counter, the coffee not yet made, the window above the sink still dark, is not the calm of someone who did not understand what was happening. She understood exactly what was happening. What Marcus did not understand, and would not understand until the legal process forced the information in front of him, was that the woman standing motionless in that kitchen had been building herself into someone who could withstand exactly this kind of moment for the better part of 15 years. Not preparing for this divorce specifically, not preparing for Marcus, preparing, in the most fundamental and physical sense, for the possibility that she might one day need to stand completely alone and not fall. She had stood in far more physically demanding situations than a quiet kitchen at 6 in the morning with a phone in her hand. She had learned, long before she ever met Marcus, what it felt like to be tested from the outside when everything inside you has already gone still. And she had learned something else, something that would become the quiet and unannounced center of this entire story. She had learned that the most important thing you can do when the test arrives is not panic. It is not perform. It is simply, and without hesitation, to begin. This is the story of a woman who spent 11 years making herself smaller than she was inside a marriage, and the single morning her husband gave her no reason to stay small anymore. The question at the heart of it is one that will stay with you long after this video ends. When someone has underestimated you for the entire length of your life together, do you correct them, or do you let the consequences do it for you? Diana grew up in a small town in Ohio, the youngest of 4 children and the only daughter. Her 3 brothers played organized sports from the time they could walk. Her father coached their teams on weekends and attended every game with the focused, uncomplicated attention of a man who believed deeply in the importance of showing up. Her mother ran the household, kept the schedule, and managed the emotional temperature of a home that was never unkind but was always, in one way or another, oriented around the needs and movements of the men inside it. Diana watched that arrangement from the time she was old enough to notice it, and she filed something away about it, not with resentment and not with any particular urgency. She simply registered, in the quiet way that observant children register things before they have the language to name them, that there was a version of a life in which a woman's primary skill was making everything around her feel easier for everyone else. She did not want that version. She did not know yet what she wanted instead, but the awareness of what she did not want lived in her like a compass she had not yet learned to read. At 14, she walked into a martial arts program operating out of a converted warehouse on the edge of town. She had seen a flyer taped to a board at school and gone alone on a Tuesday evening, without telling her mother where she was going. She sat on a bench at the back of the room and watched the entire class without participating in the drills, the corrections, the falls, the restarts. The following week, she came back and joined. She would describe that first full session years later as the first time she had ever been in a room where effort was the only currency that mattered. No one in that warehouse cared who her father was or whether she was easy to like. No one cared whether she was the quiet one or the loud one or the pretty one or the smart one. They cared whether she showed up and whether she worked. She showed up every Tuesday and Thursday. Then she added Saturday mornings. Then she added Monday. By the time she was 17, she was training 5 days a week and had stopped thinking of it as something she did and started thinking of it as something she was. By 22, she held a second-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She had competed in regional tournaments across Ohio and Indiana and had won the majority of them. She was not flashy about it. She did not display the trophies in her apartment. She kept them in a box in the closet, not out of shame, but out of the same instinct that had always kept her training private. An instinct that said the work was the point, not the recognition. By 25, she had added Muay Thai. By 28, Judo. She trained 6 mornings a week, before most of the city had turned on a single light. In that same warehouse that had changed ownership twice and its name once, but had kept its worn mats and its particular quality of early morning silence. The kind of silence that is not empty, but full of people. Concentrating. She did not talk about any of it. Not with colleagues, not at dinner parties, not on dates, with one or two late exceptions. When people asked what she did to stay in shape, she said she did a little jujitsu, and she smiled in a way that invited no follow-up questions, and people nodded and moved on to something else. She was not hiding it exactly. She simply had no interest in managing the reaction, the surprise, the disbelief, the inevitable comment that she did not look like someone who did that. She had encountered all of it in her 20s and had found it exhausting in a way that the training itself never was. It was easier to let people hold whatever picture they already had. The training was hers, the only thing in her life that had never been shaped by anyone else's expectations of who she was supposed to be. She kept it the way some people keep a journal, not as a secret, but as something that existed entirely outside the reach of other people's opinions. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. She met Marcus at a company event when she was 32. He was a regional sales director for a logistics firm, the kind of man who moved through a crowded room as though he had already been there and already decided which conversations were worth having. He was funny in the way that certain confident men are funny quick, a little sharp, always aware of whether the room was with him. Diana was standing near the window with a glass of wine she had barely touched, watching the room with the quiet attentiveness of someone who reads a space before deciding how to move through it. Marcus noticed her from across the room and made his way over. He told a mutual friend later that night that she was the most composed person he had seen in years. What he meant was that she was still. What he did not think to ask was what that stillness was made of. They dated for 3 years. They were genuinely good years, the kind of early relationship years that are easy to look back on with clarity once things have fallen apart, because the warmth was real, even if the understanding was incomplete. Marcus was attentive in the way that people can be attentive before a relationship has required anything genuinely difficult from them. He was present. He made plans. He introduced Diana to his friends with pride and described her as the calm one, which she always received with a small smile and did not correct. She was happy. She wanted a partnership, not a performance, not a rescue, and for a time, that was what she had. They married in a small ceremony in the spring of her 36th year. The training did not come up at the wedding. It did not come up on the honeymoon. When they returned and settled into the ordinary rhythms of a shared life, it existed as it had always existed, something she did early in the mornings before Marcus was awake. Something she came home from showered and quiet, ready to move into the rest of the day. He knew she trained. He did not know what that meant. She did not push him toward knowing. The marriage built itself into a structure over the following years, the kind of structure that functions smoothly because both people have agreed, usually without saying so, on the terms of their arrangement. They bought a house in year 2. They opened a joint brokerage account in year 4, a deliberate and optimistic act. The kind of financial commitment that says we are planning for a future we both intend to be present for. Diana continued to work as a project manager at an engineering firm, good at her job in the same way she was good at most things thoroughly and without needing to announce it. She continued to train. Marcus continued to describe her to people as someone who did yoga, which she had never said and never corrected him about, because correcting him would have required a longer conversation than she ever felt the moment warranted. And she had learned across many years that some corrections cost more energy than they return. What she had not examined closely enough, what she would examine, in long and unflinching detail, during the 14 months that followed, was how much of herself she had quietly set aside inside the marriage. Not dramatically, not in a single decision she could point to, but gradually, in the way that water wears a surface smooth without anyone marking the exact moment the texture changed. She had stopped mentioning her competitions after the 2nd year of the marriage, when Marcus had twice forgotten she had one coming up and she had driven herself to the tournament, competed, driven herself home, and said nothing about it when he asked how her weekend had been. She had stopped keeping her training certificates on the wall in her home office after Marcus had pointed to them in front of a guest who had asked what they were for, and answered the question himself before Diana could open her mouth. She does some martial arts thing, he had said. I think it is mostly for fitness. She had not corrected him that evening. She had poured more wine and changed the subject, and placed that moment in the same internal drawer she had been quietly filling for years without fully examining its contents. By year 7, that drawer was heavy. The marriage was still functional in the way that structures can remain standing long after the thing that made them worth maintaining has quietly departed. Marcus had grown comfortable in the specific way that some people grow comfortable when nothing in their life is pushing back against them anymore. He became harder to reach at the end of the day. He traveled more. He started arriving home later on evenings when Diana knew from his schedule that there was no reason to be late. He changed the password on the laptop they shared one afternoon and mentioned it to her 3 days later as if it were an afterthought. Hotel loyalty points appeared in their joint email inbox and disappeared within the same day, which meant he was accessing the account specifically to delete them, which meant he was being careless rather than careful. And the difference between those two things told Diana more than any of the individual details on their own. A careful person uses a separate account. A careless person deletes the evidence and believes that is sufficient. Marcus believed it was sufficient. He had spent 11 years in a marriage where nothing had ever seriously surprised him. He had no framework for what was approaching. Diana noticed all of it. She had spent 15 years in rooms where reading another person's intention from their posture, their timing, the precise quality of their hesitation was not a skill she needed to consciously apply. It was simply something her body did. The way her hands knew where to move in a clinch before her mind had finished forming the instruction. She noticed the change in Marcus, the way she noticed a shift in an opponent's weight distribution early, clearly, and without any accompanying drama. She did not confront him. In her experience, confrontation was most useful when you had already decided what you wanted the outcome to be. She had not yet decided, so she prepared instead. 6 weeks before the morning with the phone on the counter, Diana retained a divorce attorney through a referral from a colleague she trusted. She did not tell Marcus. She spent 3 evenings in her home office going through files and photographing documents with her phone account statements going back 4 years, property records, the original brokerage account agreement, the deed on the house. She uploaded the photographs to a cloud account Marcus did not know existed and organized the physical copies into a manila envelope she kept in the glove compartment of her car. She also, during those same 6 weeks, had 2 separate conversations with her bank about the mechanics of account separation and the protections available to a joint account holder who had reason to believe funds might be moved without consent. She took notes on both conversations. She kept the notes folded inside the back cover of a notebook she carried in her bag. She had carried a notebook every day for 20 years. Marcus had never once asked what was in it. What Marcus did not know, what he had never thought to inquire about across 11 years of shared meals and shared finances and shared square footage, was that Diana had 3 years earlier become a fully licensed martial arts instructor. She had been running weekend seminars out of a studio space she rented on Saturday mornings, working with a rotating cohort of students, mostly women in their 30s and 40s, who had found her through word of mouth and through a modest online presence she maintained under a name she had used in competition since her early 20s. She had never discussed the income with Marcus. Every dollar had gone into a personal account she had held since before the marriage, an account whose existence had never come up because Marcus had never asked whether she had finances that were separate from theirs. The assumption on his side had simply been that she did not. It was the same assumption he had made about most things where Diana was concerned. It had the same accuracy. The wire transfers were initiated the evening before the text arrived. Marcus moved funds from the joint savings account and from the brokerage account into a personal account he had opened 3 weeks earlier at a different bank. The total was significant. The accumulated savings of 11 years redirected overnight through a sequence of transfers that his attorney had almost certainly counseled caution about and that Marcus had almost certainly decided to execute anyway, because speed, in his experience of the world, was leverage. He had sent the screenshot of the divorce filing at 6:14 inches the morning from a hotel across the city, presumably while Diana was still asleep. She was not asleep. She was standing at the kitchen counter. She read the message twice, then a third time. She set the phone face down on the marble. She stood still for 4 minutes, long enough to let the full shape of what had happened settle into clarity. Then she picked the phone back up and called her attorney. It was not yet 7 in the morning. Her attorney answered on the 3rd ring. By 8 o'clock, an emergency motion to freeze the wire transfers had been filed with the court. The motion held. Within 72 hours, the majority of the transferred funds had been recovered and placed under court supervision pending the resolution of the divorce. Marcus received a call from his own attorney before he received any call from Diana. His attorney explained what had happened. Marcus reportedly asked what that meant. His attorney explained it in considerable detail. Marcus called Diana that afternoon. He was composed in the careful way of a man who does not yet know how much ground he has lost, but can sense that the conversation requires steadiness. He told her he had prepared a settlement offer. He said it was generous. He said she would be fine. He delivered this in the tone of someone summarizing a situation he still believed himself to be directing. Diana listened to the complete length of what he had to say without speaking or interrupting. Then she told him her attorney would be in contact with his. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to carry meaning. Marcus asked whether she had an attorney. Diana told him she had several things he did not know about. Then she ended the call, set the phone face down on the kitchen counter, drove to the warehouse, and trained for 2 hours in the late afternoon light that came through the high windows in long, dusty columns and lit the mats gold. The legal process took 14 months. Marcus did not settle when his attorney recommended settlement, which was early and repeatedly. He continued because the act of settling would have required him to formally accept, documented, and on the record, that he had fundamentally misjudged the person he had spent 11 years married to. That acknowledgement was more than his particular construction of himself could absorb at once. So he continued. And the process continued alongside him, impassive and unhurried. In month 7, during a deposition held in a conference room with fluorescent overhead lighting and a view of a concrete parking structure, Marcus's attorney asked Diana to describe how she had spent her personal time during the marriage. It was a standard approach, a fishing question designed to sketch a portrait of domestic dependence that the settlement terms could then address on Marcus's terms. Diana answered it completely, without visible reaction to its intent. She described her training history from the age of 14. She listed her certifications in sequence jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, judo, and the years in which each was obtained. She named the tournaments, the results, the year she had competed, and the year she had not. She described the instructor certification, the studio rental, the seminar schedule, the cohorts of students, the revenue structure, and the balance of the personal account into which every dollar had been deposited since the seminars began. She spoke for 11 minutes, without notes, without hesitation, and without raising her voice above the level at which she had begun. Marcus's attorney did not interrupt her once. Marcus, who had been sitting across the table with a legal pad and a pen, had stopped writing approximately 3 minutes into her answer. He did not pick up the pen again for the remainder of the session. The settlement arrived in month 14. It was not the document Marcus had drafted at the hotel on the night before he sent the text. Diana received a fair and properly calculated division of the marital assets. The full appraised value of the house was used as the basis for her share of the equity, including the portion Marcus had quietly transferred to a realtor he had engaged without her knowledge or consent 2 months before the filing. The brokerage funds, largely recovered by the emergency motion in the opening week, were divided per the original account agreement. Diana waived alimony. Not because the legal grounds were insufficient, they were not, but because she said, in the weeks after signing, that she did not want anything from Marcus that required him to continue appearing in her life on a schedule she had not chosen. She wanted a clean line. She drew it herself. She signed the documents on a Thursday morning, drove to the warehouse at noon, and trained until the light through the high windows had shifted from gold to the flat gray of early evening. She moved into a smaller apartment in a neighborhood she had been drawn to for years and had never lived in. She enrolled 3 new student cohorts within the first 2 months. People who had known her through the years of the marriage said she seemed lighter, not in the relieved, exhaled way of someone who has barely made it through something, but in the grounded, expanded way of someone who has stopped spending energy on the work of keeping themselves contained. She began competing again under the same name she had always used in that world the name Marcus had never known. She won. She did not post about it or mention it to anyone outside the warehouse. What this story leaves behind is not a simple lesson about a man who made a catastrophic miscalculation and a woman who happened to be ready. That version is too clean, and the truth is not clean. The truth includes the decade Diana spent inside a marriage, making herself easier to dismiss than she had any reason to be, not because she was weak, and not because she lacked the awareness to see what was happening, but because she had arrived, somewhere in the long middle of her adult life, at the belief that keeping herself quiet was a reasonable trade for stability, that smoothing the edges of who she was made the shared space more manageable, that the cost of correcting the picture people had of her was higher on any given day than the cost of letting the wrong picture stand. She paid that cost in increments so small and so regular that she had stopped counting them. The certificate removed from the wall, the tournament driven to a loan, the question answered by someone else while she refilled the wine glasses. Small costs. Accumulated across 11 years, they amounted to something considerable. Until the morning, Marcus sent a text and drained an account and removed, in a single careless gesture, the last reason she had to keep the wrong picture standing. What he had intended as a blindside was, in the most precise sense, the opposite. It was the first morning in 11 years that Diana had nothing left to protect, no arrangement to maintain, no peace to keep, no version of herself to manage for someone else's comfort. And what she discovered, standing still in that kitchen, in the 4 minutes before she picked up the phone, is the same thing she has described to every student she has taught in the years since. The calm was not something she found that morning. The calm was something she had built, one session at a time, in a warehouse before dawn, for the better part of her life. It had been there the whole time. She had simply, finally, been given a morning that left her no reason to pretend otherwise. Some people spend their entire lives being exactly as capable as the people around them believe them to be. Diana spent 11 years doing that. Then one morning a text arrived, an account went to zero, and she stood very still in a kitchen and she remembered exactly who she was.